I'm Nancy Pearl. Welcome back to Booklust. This is the first interview that we've done since the pandemic began in March, and I'm so glad that the first person that we're interviewing is the author of one of my favorite books from the last few months. Simon Stephenson, author of Set My Heart to 5, is here to talk to us today. Simon, welcome to the show. I wish we were in the same room talking, but this is great that you're with me.
This is a very close second, and thrilled to be here.
Can you give us the elevator pitch description of Set My Heart to 5?
I can certainly try. Every time I attempt to do this, I end up talking for half an hour, so please stop me. It's Set My Heart to 5 is a story that's set in 2054, but it's not a dystopia, it's a mystopia, so things have gone a bit wrong in a more comic human way, and it's narrated by an android called Jared. Jared starts out life as a dentist. That's his job, he's programmed to do. He's not really supposed to have feelings. That's one of the things we're going to make androids do, is they're not allowed to have feelings. And Jared begins to have feelings. And one of the things that helps him have his feelings is a love of old movies. And so to cut a long story short, he decides the thing to do is to write his own movie. And he comes out here to Los Angeles, California, where I live. And things go about as smoothly as they go for most of us when we move to Los Angeles to write movies.
As I said in the introduction, I loved this book, and when I was reading it, I know nobody wanted to sit next to me at my house because I would read aloud. I would sort of nudge them and say, "Listen to this! Isn't this great?" So where did the idea of this book come from? I know it's your first novel, and your previous book was a memoir that was about your brother's illness and death, which must have been a hard book to write. Then give us the kind of narrative from that.
Absolutely, yeah. So there's been about 9 years between books, which I definitely don't recommend to anyone, and definitely wasn't deliberate. As you said, the first book was a memoir about losing my brother, and when I had finished it, it came out and it got some nice reviews, and I felt I was a writer and I'd arrived, and now I had to write a novel because that was what serious writers did. And I tried and I tried and I tried, and I started half a dozen novels, and none of them took. And I was lucky that I had also been a screenwriter along the way, and I got a break in that, and that led me to moving out here to California, and I got a job at Pixar, which is based in San Francisco. So really where this novel comes from is a few years ago, I moved to the Bay Area, to San Francisco, and two things happened there. One was that I just felt like I was in this futuristic world where every second person I met was working on a space rocket or a terrible startup to do something terrible to humanity. And then the other thing was my day job was working at this company Pixar, who are renowned for the emotion inherent in their movies. And of course, that's not an accident. That whole campus is like a laboratory for the study of emotion in movies. And so as my time there was coming to an end, and I really, I'd had this burning desire to write a novel for almost a decade at this point. And this has never happened to me before. Normally my ideas, I have to wrestle them out of the mud and beat them into shape for a long time. And this one wasn't that. At some point, during that time, the idea of a screenwriting android popped into my head, and I couldn't get rid of it. And I kind of knew from fairly early on that this was actually going to be a novel that I could write, and that I would write all the way through.
Was the main character is Jared. So I'm really interested in how authors choose names, because the names in my novel, George and Lizzie, and even the less major characters, I couldn't imagine their names being anything other than George and Lizzie and Jack and Marla, all of that. So now that Jared is Jared, at what point did the name come to you? Because my names came to me immediately. Their names were first.
Yeah, a great point. And like you, I wonder if as writers, and maybe as readers too, we take so much interest in names, and I kind of sometimes wonder how much that resonates with with people reading. So I, for instance, just read or reread Ian Banks's book The Crow Road, which is this memoir. It's not a memoir, it's a buildings roman about a young man in Scotland. And there's a lawyer character in this book whose name is Lawrence L. Blake. And he's a sort of comic Dickensian kind of lawyer. And his initials are LLB, which happens to be the law qualification in Scotland. Like, that's the name the letter you get after your name. And I think I'm probably the only person that has ever got that joke. Like I've Googled it extensively, and no one else seems to have noticed it. I'm with you. I care deeply about names. I probably have a terrible confession here to make about the name of my Jared, which is that at the time I was looking around for a name which would sort of fit in Android, and I kind of had this vague idea of, because we're going to treat our androids very much as sort of second-class citizens. I had this idea that what would be a name that may be popular now, but by 2054 nobody in their right mind would think about calling someone. For better or for worse, Jared Kushner was playing a much more visible role in the monstrosities of the administration at that point. And I kind of thought it might be funny if the name Jared was just a name that nobody would ever use anymore. It'd be like calling your child Donald or something. You just wouldn't dream of it. So that was a big part of it. But then I was also reminded recently of another Pacific Northwest connection, which is the narrator of Douglas Copeland's Girlfriend in a Coma. Or part, he doesn't narrate it all, he narrates part of it, is a Jared as well. And I always adored that book, and it wasn't conscious, but I definitely wonder if when I lit upon the name of Jared from Jared Kushner, probably some connection fizzled in the back of my brain that said, oh, Jared's an excellent name for a narrator.
That's so funny, because I never thought of Jared Kushner when I was reading about Jared in the book. That's amazing. Yeah, he never came into my mind.
And that's quite reassuring to me, because I think at the time when I did that, it was the administration was they were more bumbling and incompetent rather than where they've gotten themselves to now, and perhaps it's not so funny anymore, So I'm quite glad that my Jared isn't associated with that Jared, and I probably shouldn't say. I need to think of another reason.
Was this you've hinted, or you sort of implied this, but was this an easy novel to write? Sure.
I mean, it was really, it's my first novel, so of course I don't have a lot of comparison. Certainly in terms of my memoir, that was a very different process, because so much of that was kind of unprocessed emotion. This one, I definitely wouldn't say it was easy, but I would say that I always felt like I had a roadmap for it, and that I never went kind of too far from the roadmap. And part of that, I think, was I had this idea that, because Jared's so in love with the movies, I wanted the novel to kind of have the shape and feel of a movie, and to kind of be that same kind of journey of roller coaster, but ultimately catharsis. And I almost feel like it's not cheating, but I definitely feel like in some ways it was an easier novel to write, because I had that kind of, roadmap of a structure to follow. And of course, it's also a structure that, as a screenwriter, I'm pretty familiar with and well used to. So I think the real question or the real test will be, as I get into the next book, we'll know whether this one was easy or this is how it is. So.
Right. One of the things that characterizes this novel are the different styles that it's written in. So part of it is written as all dialogue, like a script, and drawings and other things, all of which I have to say I thoroughly adored. And Jared's screenwriting, the screenwriting class that he's taking, is just a hoot for want of a better word. There's a novel by Karen Carbo called The Diamond Lane that's also set in Los Angeles, and that one of the two main characters, who are sisters, one of the two main characters is also taking a screenwriting class but you have to read it. I don't want to give away. It's a wonderful novel. I mean, I loved that novel, but it's also just a great takeoff of Hollywood.
And writing.
I will absolutely check out. I'm always in the market for a Hollywood satire or a Hollywood takeoff. I'm sort of amazed there's not more of them. You know, given how many writers are routinely mangled by this industry. But yeah, that sounds great.
Most of the Hollywood novels, though, seem to be they end badly. The Day of the Locust and
yeah, absolutely. And I mean, I think one of my great favorites, and talk about ending badly, is The Last Tycoon. It ended so badly that Fitzgerald died halfway through. What exists of that book I adore, and I have this theory that book was going to be better even than Gatsby if he had just had the chance, because I feel like all the pieces were there, and from the half that exists and his leftover notes, and I think again it was going to end tragically, of course, and maybe that's just the natural ending for writers who come to Hollywood, right?
Right. Yeah. Do you, John Irving, who The World According to Garp and A Widow for 1 Year, and those are my two favorite books of his, which is why they're in my head. When I interviewed him years ago, said that he does not begin writing until he knows the last line. So did you have that? Did you do like a picture, whatever it's called, a something board?
Yeah, how fascinating. So I definitely didn't know the last line, and I definitely didn't do much in the way of those boards or those. I mean, what I did though was I think I knew two things. I knew the geography, because the book starts in the Midwest and moves to Los Angeles, and I think we can say without giving too much away, goes to another place. So I kind of knew that was all happening, and I also knew I kind of knew the ending in terms of what the character would do. And
was there a part of the book, of writing the book, that maybe was more difficult for you, or more emotional when you were working on this book?
Yeah, it's a great question. I mean, I think the real technical challenge was writing in voice. So the book is narrated by an android called Jared, and I set myself a very fine line to write, because Jared he's trying his best to be human. He's trying to be he calls it reassuringly human, and often that manifests as making jokes and making puns that absolutely have the capacity to fall flat, and sometimes are meant to fall flat. And this was, I think, the real. This was where a lot of the real work in the book was, because of course comedy is timing, and is the comma in the wrong place or the 3 extra words can ruin that. And then also I think I learned fairly early on that simply this probably wasn't going to be a book for everyone, because I'd give a chapter to 2 different friends, and one would come back and say, oh, this is great, it's the funniest thing I've ever read, and another one would say, what on earth are you doing? This so I think the voice was the real thing, and like right up until the last copy edit, we were moving words around and punctuation to try and get that. I feel very proud of it. I feel I've succeeded on the terms I set myself. I know from the reviews that it's a similar thing, that some people absolutely love it, some people really don't love that part of it. So that was that was the big technical challenge, was the voice.
Don't you think, though, in the end, that you're writing this book for yourself?
It's a really good question, and I think that probably is something that I've kind of learned along the way is that I think I read something, I think it was in the Writer's Library, and someone was saying that, of course, if you're not interested in what you're writing, how on earth will anyone else be? And I think the more positive sort of version of that is if you write something that you yourself truly love, there'll be other people out there that might connect with it. So yeah, I probably was in some ways mostly trying to make myself laugh, which is, maybe horribly narcissistic, but hey, here I am in Hollywood, California. So
right, yeah, that it fits, right? Did you grow up as a reader? Did you come from a reading family?
Yeah, so I was a huge reader. I wouldn't necessarily say I was from a reading family. My mum was an elementary school teacher, though, so I feel like that gives you this huge head start, because of course, reading was very important. But I feel like reading to me was more important to her than her own reading for pleasure. She would read on holidays and things, but definitely wasn't, what we'd call a bookworm or something. Whereas I definitely was, I was always at the public library. I could cycle there from quite a young age, from 6 or 7. I could find my way over there, and I had the library card, and I knew exactly the limits of how many books I was allowed each week, and all of that stuff, and made my way through the children's section, and by 7 or 8 you're begging the librarian to take you and pick out some books from the adult section that might be suitable. So yeah, I absolutely was one of those kids that devoured everything. I think Coleridge, right? Coleridge was famously the last man who had read everything, and he called himself a library cormorant. And I've taken lately to calling myself a junior library cormorant.
I think the American writer who we could say is the library cormorant is Jonathan Lethem, because it feels like he's read absolutely everything.
He also owns them all as well.
Right. Well, were you a big science fiction fan? I mean, where did this interest in androids come from?
This is very interesting, because I have to confess I never really was, and it was really with a lot of trepidation that I stepped into this world of writing about an android, because who am I to be qualified to write about an android? But an interesting thing that happened was one of the early reviews mentioned the writer Terry Pratchett, and this was funny to me because I probably haven't read him in 20 years, but at that time there was definitely a phase when I was obsessed with him and read everything that came out, and I remember queuing up at the bookstore the day a new one was released, and all of that stuff. So I think whilst I definitely don't have the I've kind of got the canonical science fiction background that of the 10 that we've all read, right. But while I don't have the broader background, I feel like maybe there's other bits of my childhood reading that made its way into this book, and Terry Pratchett is probably the big one.
I love Terry Pratchett too, and I got to interview him again years and years ago, and I would show the interview to my library science students, and they were all disgusted by how much I fawned over him. They thought that my adoration of his books was too obvious, they felt. But I too love Terry Pratchett's, especially the one set in Ankh-Morpork with Sam Vimes. That whole that's half.
That's the Discworld series, I think.
Yeah. Right. Yeah. They're fabulous. When there's 2 mysteries by Isaac Asimov where did you read those, where one is one is a robot and the other is a human, and the robots are Daniel, and the Caves of Steel is one of them.
I've definitely, and again, this is that same period of being
right. Yeah.
I definitely read at least one of them, which was the Rules of Robotics.
Right. Yeah.
Which is maybe both of them, and I think I can vaguely remember the covers. I think I went on a binge, actually. I think I probably did.
When you were working on Set My Heart to 5, did you give up reading fiction while you were working on your novel, or did you look for books? Some of the writers, as you know, in the writer's library, when they're working on a novel, they're reading books that they feel will help them write that novel. Which side did you come down on?
I'm very much on the side of being terrified to read things that are in any way similar. Partly because I'm very, I think I'm quite easily influenced. And so if I'm reading a lot of a particular writer, and they use a particular word a lot, or they use even like a semicolon a lot or something, I find that seeping in. And to give one example, the Virgin Suicides I read, when I was 20 or 21, and for years afterwards, I couldn't write anything that wasn't in that sort of lackadaisical, lethargic, narrative, beautiful tone that he absolutely nails in that book. And so yeah, I have to be very careful about that stuff.
I think with a book like Set My Heart to 5, where the voice is what carries the book, you don't want another voice from another book to start seeping in. And I remember an experience of reading all of this mystery series by the Lockridges with Mr. and Mrs. North, and I remember dreaming in that style. So I understand, what you're saying about that. Are you working on a new novel, and do you not want to talk about that, which is fine too?
I'm happy to talk in like it genuinely isn't much to tell. I'm sort of my joke, and it's not a joke, it's entirely true, is in all of that 9 years between my 2 so far books, I told myself, so when I write the second book, by the time it's out, I'm going to have the third book all planned out and ready to go, if not finished, because I don't want to be in this situation again of having finished one book and then having to really think about what the next one is going to be. I just want to be able to launch into it. Needless to say, 5K now, I'm only now beginning to kind of work out what's next. I've got a couple of things that I'm developing and playing with and working up, but for me it's always such a process of experimentation. Apart from I mentioned Set My Heart to 5, that wasn't such a process, but certainly with screenwriting and everything like that, everything I sort of originate myself, probably half to 3/4 of it never goes anywhere.
Yeah, when I'm thinking that there are some writers who do just what you said. By the time you're doing the final copy edits on the book that's just done, they already know what's the next book is, and they're doing the storyboard and stuff like that. I could never do that kind of thinking. That's not me.
Yeah, no, exactly. And I think that's sort of, I've kind of concluded that as well, that I don't have that kind of brain. So like, if realistic, like hopefully it won't be 9 years, but for the next one. But I think genuinely I'm someone who, if I'm going to write something, it's got to be kind of from my heart, and I'm going to put everything into it. And for me, the only way I can do that is with time. I know there's people that can do that year on year, but I don't think that's my makeup, really.
Yeah. Besides Terry Pratchett, do you have another favorite comic novelist?
Yeah, so there's so many, and they're all, interestingly, they're kind of all American. So specifically, and it's funny because you don't hear them spoken about so much anymore, but Ring Lardner and his baseball stories, and Damon Runyon and his Broadway stories, like those two particularly, I think I came to, at that sort of, I was probably in my early 20s, so, wide open to being influenced, and I just couldn't believe how hilarious these guys were, so sort of line on line, and that sort of wry, ironic, quite gentle a lot of the time, and usually, specifically with Lardner, it's this collection called You Know Me, Al, and it's, as you know, it's this journeyman baseball player who's writing letters home to his friend Al, who lives back in the town he came from. And the great thing is the humor is all self-deprecating. It's always about him. It's never mocking other people. It's always, we have to read through the lines and kind of laugh at the narrator. And those are wonderful books. And it's always sort of surprising to me that they're not better known. I don't know if you can speak to that. They just don't seem to be out there very much.
I think because I think we're so interested in what's new that we forget that there's some wonderful books. I mean, I've been trying to address that in my Twitter feed with a backlist book of the day. But I think, to kind of, there should be a Library of America collection of Ring Lardners and of Damon Runyons. You're absolutely right. Let me ask you one more question. When I try to describe Set My Heart to 5, I struggle because I don't want to say it's heartwarming, because I don't like that adjective particularly. But do you like that adjective, and would you say it's heartwarming?
I'm with you that I think it's one of those words that if its meaning was still what its literal meaning is supposed to be, then it would be wonderful and it would be a joy to described as that. But I think it's now got this sort of just overlay of I think we expect that heartwarming is usually part of some cynical marketing plan, isn't it?
Yeah,
and so I think for heartwarming, we often just read sentimental or
sappy.
Yeah, exactly. So I don't know if I have a better word for heartwarming. I mean, it's definitely certainly one of the challenges of marketing the book is exactly that there's a way to market it as heartwarming, gentle comedy, and some people enjoy it for that, and that's wonderful. I don't think it entirely is that, and I feel like it's a bit like if you're a supermarket and you're trying to sell oatmeal and you write delicious chocolate on the box, you might initially sell more of these boxes of oatmeal, but no one's going to be happy when they get home, because, and even the people that wanted oatmeal in the first place, they can't find the oatmeal now. So I don't have a better word than heartwarming. I think we've been the Amazon thing says it's guaranteed to make you cry, which is but it's phrased as a joke, so it's a perennial challenge, I think.
Yeah. Simon, thank you so much for taking the time to talk to me this morning. I know our Book Lust video, people who watch this or listen to it will, I hope, rush right out and read Set My Heart to 5. It's a delight.
Oh, wow. Well, Nancy, thank you so much for having me. It's really been such a joy, and thank you for all your support. It means the world.
Thank you. Bye-bye.